Hi, everyone. Welcome to this live session. I'm glad you could all join me today and really happy to be hosting another live about the selective and OC exam. Before we get started, can I just get a quick message or reaction in the chat just to confirm that you can all hear me okay and it's running smoothly? Yes. Yep. All right, amazing. Cool. So we'll begin in just a couple of minutes to give everyone a chance to connect. In the meantime, I'll just quickly go over how the session will work. And if you have any questions, I will be doing a Q&A session towards the end. While we wait for people to join, I'll do an overview of what Alpha is currently doing to support students leading up to the selective NOC test. So as we near the end of term 1, we do have the April holiday program coming up, and that's going to be for both OC and selective, which will run across the 2-week break. So this will consist of a 3 full-day mock exam, and it will basically simulate the real test. We also have some online selective and OC test packs available as extra practice questions. And another really helpful free feature that I want to mention is our writing feedback tool. So this is just something which is on our website. And for students who are struggling with writing, you can always plug any extra pieces or just practice writing that you've done into our writing feedback tool. And it's specifically for the selective exam. So you're going to get feedback and comments that are very specific towards how to improve and to get better marks in the selective test. So besides that, there is one more thing, which is the school calculator. Now, it is calibrated to be at Alpha 1 level, which is fairly close to the difficulty of the real test. But if you are doing extra practice papers on the side and you want to take sort of sitting, that's a pretty good calculator to use just to figure out and gauge what schools you might be able to get into. All right, great. So I think all the comments are loud and clear. All right, amazing. So for those of you who are joining for the first time, welcome. My name's Rebecca, and I've been working with students preparing for selective and OC for around the last 8 years now. Today's session is all about exam preparation and what you should be doing in the final month to maximize your performance on the test day. So what we'll be doing in this session, I'll go through a few. First of all, it's going to be about the 2025 exam, and there have been some really major changes leading up to this year's exam. First of all, online versus paper in the past. So we've all gone online now. Everything's computer-based, and that's a really major change which is impacting the way students are preparing for the test. The second point we'll talk about is how to create a structured study routine and get into this kind of good habit of practicing and studying leading up to the exam. Third one is key strategies to improve time management skills. Fourth one is going to be some test taking skills and tips. The fifth thing, a subject by subject breakdown. I'm going to dive into those major topics and kind of looking at how you can really improve on weaker subjects. And the next thing is looking at how to be prepared for the actual exam day. And that last will be going through a Q&A session. So any questions you have, save those towards the end. I'll be going around and answering a lot of those questions. Okay, so this live is also recorded. So if you do miss anything, you can always rewatch it in the live tab on our YouTube channel. There's also a lot of other helpful videos. So definitely check out Alpha One's YouTube and see what's there that you might need. Okay, so we'll dive into this first part, changes to the 2025 exam. So big change. First of all, the exam is going to be held over 3 days now, which is completely different to the 1-day test that we used to have. So check which day you are on. The information should be available around 2 weeks before the actual exam. The government should send out some information to individual parents, and your kid will be scheduled for a specific test day. So it will run across Friday the 2nd, Saturday the 3rd, or Sunday the 4th of May. So across 3 different days. And this is the first year that they're doing this. We assume it's most likely because they don't have enough devices to sit everyone on the one day across the testing centres, so it has been split up across multiple days. The exam will be different across the 3 days, and this is just to ensure fairness. Students taking the test on later days aren't going to be placed at an unfair advantage when if the same questions. So following to this, the next major change is the selective is now being conducted online rather than on paper. So I'm sure everyone is aware of this by now, and it's had quite a few implications on how kids are going to prepare for the exam. So first, the exam is done on a computer or a device, which means that all of our students need to be comfortable navigating between questions, typing up their responses, especially for the writing section, and managing their time on screen. So writing skills is going to include a lot of typing and digital formatting that you'll need to be very familiar with. And because of that, it's important to practice. You can use things like Google Docs or similar platforms under timed conditions. So on the PowerPoint there, I've got a few, two websites actually, which are really nice, great user interface, very engaging. And I'd recommend students check those out, especially if your typing is weaker. The first one is Typing Club, and the second one is 10 Fast Fingers. So have a look at those, just kind of train your typing speed to be up to par where you're getting through that writing section smoothly. More relevant for selective students, but OC kids, you'll eventually be going through that process as well. Okay, so unlike the old paper-based format where you could pretty easily flip between pages and annotate on your test paper, the online version requires a bit more screen awareness. So students need to get used to scanning information digitally, things like taking notes on a separate piece of paper and pacing themselves while keeping an eye on your digital timer. When preparing for the exam, make sure that any practice you do really mimics the setup, especially at this point, you only have 1 month left to go. So try to use a laptop or a device similar to the one you'll be tested on. Sit at a desk, avoid distractions, time yourself properly. The more familiar you are with this online test format, the more confident and calm you're going to be on the actual test day. Okay, so the next part. I'm just going to go into typing a little bit more just to help parents and students understand why this is important, because I think it's something that is quite often neglected. It's not really seen as a really essential skill that people don't really think of it when they go into the exam. So typing speed really matters. You're trying to aim for at least 35 to 40 words per minute with minimal mistakes. So if you're not really reaching that speed at the moment, time to take a look and just see if this pacing is right for you. So you can practice using the two websites I mentioned before. If possible, try to use a laptop with a full-sized keyboard, since this will be most similar to the ones that they're using in the real exam. And you can also practice across multiple devices, just to become familiar and get a feel with different types of keyboards. Writing on paper and typing are very different. So you can use things like Google Docs, Microsoft Office Word, even Notepad app to do practice typing under time conditions and just get some feedback as well from a tutor or a parent on your digital writing. So online writing, in summary, is all about speed, structure, and clarity. The biggest advantage you get is you can edit easily, and the biggest challenge is probably trying to stay focused on screen. So start practicing now, get comfortable with typing, and try to refine your structure. For anyone who feels like your typing skills are probably holding you back a little bit in the writing component, pretty confident that you'll have enough time to really get on top of this aspect and set some time aside to practice. Once you start doing that daily, your muscle memory is going to develop very quickly and you'll get the hang of typing very quickly. So just to reiterate, your typing speed is really important and you're unfairly disadvantaged if you neglect this aspect of the exam. Even if your ideas and writing skills are really excellent, you want to be able to execute them efficiently on the keyboard, and that way you're going to earn the marks you really deserve. Okay, so we'll move on to the last bit, which is equal weighting now across all of our top exam subjects. So with the new equal weighting system in place, what does this really mean? For selective, your 4 different subjects, so reading, maths, reading, English, thinking skills, and writing are all going to be 25%, while for OC, that's going to be around 33%. And it's a big shift from before, where writing didn't have as much influence on your overall mark, and subjects such as thinking skills held a much bigger portion. So this is exciting and also a huge opportunity for a lot of our students, with writing counting for a big 25%. Students who strategically work on their writing can actually boost their overall marks in a big way. It's no longer just about being good at maths or English. Instead, if you have clear, structured, thoughtful writing, it's going to make a massive difference to your mark as well. This going to ties really nicely in with the OC prep side of things. So if your child is in year 3 or early year 4, you've now got time to start developing those writing skills early on as well. And try to do that before they hit the more competitive selective years. You're not really cramming last minute. You're building strength across all of your subjects, and the fact that they're all worth a quarter now is going to make a big difference for that final result. So if you're thinking about long-term selective or even private school scholarships, it's a good time to invest in those strong writing foundations. Not only will it help in your exams, but it's a pretty good skill that will carry you throughout life. Okay, moving on to the I want to take a look at good habits and forming a study routine. So because we're so limited on time, it's the final month leading up to the exam. Let's talk about how to structure a good study routine so you can make the most of your time. So this is going to include a good balance of mock exams, targeted drills, review sessions, and not just random studying. So tension's pretty high, and I know a lot of kids are quite stressed out in this final bit of preparation. So just a reminder again that the test is going to be on the 2nd to the 4th of May. And from past experience working with a lot of top performing students, I do notice one clear pattern which stands out for them, and that's really consistent, structured exam practice that makes a big difference. So on the screen here, I've got a sample weekly plan that I'd recommend. And of course, you can tweak it a little bit for your own schedule, but I'll quickly run through an outline of this. Basic summary is I'd recommend doing 2 full-length practice tests per week under exam conditions. And if you think about that, from here up until the exam, it's 4 weeks, 2 tests a week. You're looking at 8 papers across the month, which isn't going to be a very heavy workload. Try to do a focused review of mistakes after your each test, and also do targeted practice sessions for weaker areas. Now, the key thing here is that every session should be structured like a real exam, either your environment, the time, focus, and having no distractions. So why is this important? Because at the time the test day arrives, you don't really want the exam to feel like a really big, stressful event. Instead, it should just be like another practice test that you've done in the past and that you've done many times before. This sense of familiarity will also really help remove that anxiety and nervousness kids will get from the exam day, and just try help you perform at your best. So across the weekends, I'd recommend doing sort of a big sit-down practice session. Saturdays, Sundays can be your main exam test days. So try start early in the morning, 9:30, just like in the real test. Try to aim to do a full-length practice test for 4 or 3 subjects. Treat it exactly like the exam day again. No distractions, minimal breaks, and basically giving it your all as if it were the real test. Once you're done, take a break, have lunch, and then in the afternoon, review your mistakes. So this reviewing part is just as important as the test itself. Look at what you did wrong, figure out why, and try to write down the things you need to improve. Without review, you're really just repeating your mistakes rather than fixing them. Across your weekdays, this should be shorter, more focused sessions. So you wouldn't really have time for full tests anyways due to school, but we can break it down into much shorter study blocks. On the diagram I have here, we've got a sample timetable for your Monday to Friday schedule. I probably recommend on a Monday, do a simple 30 minutes practice of writing, work on structure, planning, and then do another 30 minutes of just reading comprehension drills. So generally try to focus on trickier questions that you often get wrong. This can be poetry or inference-based questions. For Tuesday, time for some thinking skills drills. So if you struggle with problem solving, do a set of maybe 10 to 15 focused questions and go over your mistakes carefully as well. If you are looking at extra resources and where to find those, we have a lot of posts across our Facebook and WeChat groups where we do release these extra practice questions that are organized by different topics and question types. Across Wednesday, if possible, do another full-length test in the evening. If you find that's a bit too much, maybe do 2 sections under timed conditions. Thursday can be dedicated to maths problem solving. Try to review necessary formulas. So this is really important too. You don't want to go into the exam with a lot of information that you need to try and record during the test. So be familiar with things like your area, length conversions, general stuff that's going to come up a lot, and always make sure you're on top of your mental maths. So you should be able to very quickly do calculations in your head. Any difficult question types you should practice as well, and any areas where you've made a lot of mistakes in before, try to review. For Friday, try to keep this day light, maybe for a quick revision with some flashcards and looking at a few past mistakes, going through those questions, and just try to focus on strategies before the weekend approaches for those big test days. Try to schedule in a lot of breaks as well and a bit of exercise to keep your body and brain in tip-top condition. Make sure you get proper sleep and relaxation, so balanced day is still just as important as studying when leading up to the exam. Okay, so in terms of time management, I'm going to talk about this because it's a very important one, even though often repeated and reminded to the students. One of the biggest mistakes kids can make is losing track of time during the tests. And it still happens to kids, even if they're very experienced and still do very well in the exams. You don't want to end up rushing through those last few questions. And the best way to avoid issues with time management is having checkpoints. So we'll take thinking skills as an example. You have 40 questions in 40 minutes. So that means after 10 minutes, you're looking at question 10. After 20 minutes, you should be at question 20, and 30 minutes, question 30. If you're behind at any checkpoint, try to pick up your pace by focusing on those slightly easier questions first and flagging harder ones to come back to later. So this is just to ensure you don't really leave any easy marks on the table. I know it sounds obvious and it's something we always remind students of, but honestly, when you're stressed and under pressure, it's pretty natural to lose awareness, and time restraints can really sneak up on anybody. So what I want to remind everyone of is to really stay conscious of time and keep a sharp eye on the clock during the exam. If you get stuck on a hard question, many students might end up wasting time and not completing questions further down. So you need to remember that all the questions are, again, equally weighted. So a better strategy is to guess those harder ones, mark it down on your scrap paper, come back to it later when you have finished the rest of the exam. And for taking skills. So while time management is a pretty big test taking skills that many kids still struggle with, we do have a few other tips that we want to talk about just to help boost your child's mark. So the first one is slow down just enough to read questions carefully. A lot of mistakes come from misreading or rushing the setup, and it happens more often than not where even high-performing students underestimate a really easy question. And this can be due to oversight, or they miss key information, then end up with the wrong answer. So always try double check, reread, and be careful as you go through any reading questions. The second one, which is more relevant for maths and thinking skills, is to write all your working out. And I stress this because, especially on longer maths and thinking skills questions, one small misstep can usually throw off your whole answer. With any extra time that you have, if you have your working out written down, you can refer back to this visual progression that you've done and even check just really basic working out to catch any unnecessary errors. So by writing everything down, you know exactly where you may have made a mistake, and you can save yourself the time of doing all of that working out again. It's also not very realistic when we say, check all your answers. Kids aren't going to have time to go through their whole test again and redo all the questions. So having that visual guide there of what you've already done and you can refer back to is going to save you a lot of time and make this process a lot more doable and efficient. Okay, and last one is talking about making guesses when it comes to exams. So guessing might not feel like the most natural strategy during a high pressure exam, but it's actually a key technique and it's used by a lot of kids, even if they do really well. And it just helps people stay efficient under time constraints. So rather than leaving questions blank or spending too long on one, smart test takers are going to rely on the power of elimination. You can start off by crossing off any options that are clearly incorrect, This immediately increases your chances of choosing the right answer. Even just crossing out 2 is going to increase your chance of getting it right from 25% to 50%. So cross off any that are clearly incorrect and make an educated guess based on the remaining options. This is going to be far more effective than random guessing or getting stuck. And it's all about keeping your momentum, maximizing every mark, especially when your time is about to run out. So to summarize, a lot of these test taking skills are hard for kids to pick up just by me talking about it. So it's always best taught and learnt through practice. Make sure you're taking as many trial papers in simulated exam environments as possible before the exam. And if that isn't really a thing you can do at home, then there are always trial test courses available where students are in those exam environments, and it will mimic the whole process. So preparation really isn't all about knowledge. It's about building that approach and good habits, which lead to a calm, confident, and accurate test-taking experience. Okay, so we'll talk through some quick fire tips for each section of the test now. Okay, so we'll start off with reading, relevant to both selective and OC students. So first of all, skimming the passage. This is going to give you a quick overview of the test, its structure, tone, main ideas, and all of these other parts of the text before you get into those finer details. Try to note down any key information while reading. This is especially useful for longer or more complex texts like poetry or persuasive writing. Now that you currently annotate on the paper itself, it's good to make note as you go and read along and refer back to the screen. If you're stuck, always try to eliminate wrong answers first, and then try to do a bit of work on a question, come back to it later on if it really is too difficult to solve in the moment. For mathematical reasoning, I always advise know your common formulas and your shortcuts. You don't want to waste a lot of time trying to recall those basic formulas. And when I talk about formulas, it's things like area, volume, percentages, averages, even common number patterns. Just knowing them off by heart means you can solve a lot of these questions a lot faster and with more confidence. If something is taking too long, flag it, give it a reasonable guess, and move on. You always have time later if you want to return and rework it, but try not to leave questions blank. For maths still, always double check your answers if you have time. Silly mistakes happen under pressure, especially in maths. So if you do finish early, use that time to double check your working. Things for like careless errors or misreading the question. You can have issues like dropping a negative sign somewhere or even miswriting a number when you copy the question onto your working out paper. So that's going to happen a lot now with this online format. And kids really need to watch out for those really careless mistakes. Yeah, even catching 1 or 2 errors is going to make a big difference in your final score. So definitely worthwhile taking that on and trying to incorporate it into your practice and preparation. So yeah, always make sure you write down your working for maths, and this ties into thinking skills as well. So with thinking skills, it's an interesting one because you have 40 minutes to do 40 questions. And a lot of students and parents consider thinking skills to be one of the hardest subjects. But having 1 minute per question, it doesn't really give you time to sit down and slowly work through every possibility. But here's the thing with thinking skills as well. If you can recognize the type of question, whether it's a logical puzzle, pattern recognition, even evaluating an argument, you can often solve it very quickly using the right method. So the more familiar you are with these different question types, the faster you'll be at choosing a strategy and moving forward with it confidently. A lot of the times with thinking skills, speed comes more from strategy and not from just rushing through your questions. Another thing about thinking skills is that certain types of questions come up again and again. So for example, you might see strengthen the argument questions or ones where you find a missing step in a pattern. So by practicing and reviewing past papers, you'll start to notice these question types and you'll get faster at recognizing what each question really wants from you. This pattern recognition is going to help you avoid wasting time on working it out from scratch every time, as you already sort of know the steps to solving it very quickly. The last thing is sometimes just trust your instincts with these questions because thinking skills, the idea is not really to test your memorization or your knowledge. It's really to test the way you think. So try to trust your instincts. Overthinking is probably one of the biggest traps in this topic, and sometimes your first answer can actually be the correct one, but a lot of self doubt or second guesses, even overanalyzing, both causes you to lose time and go with a wrong answer. So, if you've practiced enough, your instincts are usually trained by exposure to similar questions. So, when you're short on time, try to go with your gut and trust that your preparation has built enough foundation for you to make those fast and accurate decisions. Okay, so with thinking skills, I might just add a few more comments from what I've noticed with all of the students and working with them to build up in that area. It is one where kids lose a lot of marks, often not because they don't know the content, but because of the way questions are structured. So it's not just testing knowledge, but really how you're able to reason and think through a question. And it's where a lot of students lose those easy marks just because they're rushing or they can't really spot the shortcut in the question. So, some advice I would give is try to work on your mental process. Don't just read the question, straight away try to solve it or guess the right answer. Learn to break the question down. So, what is it actually asking you, first of all? What is the logic leading to the correct answer or what you think may be the correct answer? And after each question, especially if you got it wrong, take 10 seconds to think about why was that wrong and where did the mistake happen in your logical reasoning. And a lot of the times, this review stage is where your learning is going to take place as well. Try to categorize the question type as soon as you see it. This is usually between things like logical argument, a pattern or sequence, maybe a mathematical puzzle. And the faster you can label it in your head, the faster you'll know what steps to use and proceed with the question. A final thing I want to say is elimination can be your best friend sometimes. Most thinking skills questions are multiple choice. So even if you're unsure, try to rule out as many options as you can. And once you've done that, if you have to make an educated guess, then go for it. Okay. So the last one is writing, which is not as relevant for our OC students, but pretty important now with the selective cohort. When it comes to writing, I always advise try to spend 2 to 3 minutes planning before writing. Even if you're a really high scoring student when it comes to writing, it's always great to have that plan set track of what you're trying to say. So I know jumping straight in might really feel productive, but it can often lead to a messy structure and unclear arguments. So taking a few minutes to plan is going to help you organize your thoughts and choose some of the stronger examples that you want to use. You'll also avoid running out of ideas halfway through or end up mixing up your ideas throughout paragraphs. So, for persuasive writing, you can quickly outline your position and list 2 or 3 clear points to support it. For imaginative, try to map out your beginning, build up, and end. A simple plan will usually save time in the long run and it will lead to clearer and stronger writing. So, some advice that I have is be familiar with a lot of the different text types. So, if you notice in the last few years, these writing prompts and the stimulus that they use has started to get a lot more creative in its own way as well. So, the more niche things like advice sheets, those are all kind of topics kids should know how to write and structure their writing around. I'll probably advise for those who are not very comfortable with all the different text type yet to have a look at our website. So it's called Alpha One Writing 101. It's a quick cheat sheet showing all the different text types and how you can structure it. So maybe take a look through that if you're not 100% sure with all your different text types, and then just try follow that structure. Anything that's non-creative generally follows very similar structure. You have your intro, body paragraphs, and conclusion. So don't get thrown off by a very niche text type and think that you have to write something completely different to what you're used to. Um, and yeah, it happens because we get some kids that end up doing dot points when they know very well they shouldn't be using dot points in their writings. And yeah, it just really doesn't contribute to those marks that you want to get. Another thing is to focus on quality over length. So more words are not going to equal more marks. In fact, longer responses that are very repetitive or off topic can actually score lower. What we want is a well-structured response with strong vocabulary, specific examples, and logical flow. This will always outperform a longer rambling piece. So try to aim for more depth rather than just volume. Since the writing task is done online, typing ability again is going to have a real impact on performance. The more natural typing feels to you, the more brain power you can save for crafting your actual response as well. So overall, there is a lot of resources out there across all the subjects. If you want revision materials that's organized by topic, a lot of that is available for free across our Facebook and WeChat pages. So try to use those resources as long as you know what you need to work on. Do very targeted revision. I'd say that's going to really benefit you in the final month. Okay, so about on the day and how prepared for the exam. So I do want to express at this point to all of the students that are listening that I completely understand it is a big exam. The nerves and anxiety can really amplify, and it is your first big test probably. I went through all of this myself many years ago when I did OC and Selective too. So as the exam gets closer, it's definitely normal to feel nervous, but the key here is probably to channel that energy into focus rather than a fear of the test and the exam. I'm going to quickly talk about the basics we mentioned before and how that's going to counteract those nerves. So sticking to a structured routine, like the study plan that I had shared earlier, knowing you're well prepared, knowing you've done as much as you can for the exam is going to help with any anxiety or nervousness. Having those simulated test conditions is probably the most important one. You're already used to the testing environment. You're already familiar with how the exam is going to feel. That's going to give you a lot more confidence leading up to the test day. Try to take care of yourself. So proper sleep, exercise, stay relaxed. These are all just as important as studying, and you want to keep that balance. And on the day, if you do feel really nervous, try to take deep breaths, stay positive. Don't think too far ahead or overthink, and don't let anxiety really consume you, because those thoughts can usually lead to a lot more lack of confidence when you end up doing the exam. So always try to think about what you're going to do after the exam, fun things, happy things, and yes, don't let that anxiety eat you up. And one more, try to not cram last minute. So the night before the test, wind down early and get a good night's sleep. Go into the exam feeling fresh and confident. With the week leading up to the exam, maybe try to sleep half an hour earlier as you usually would, since you'll need to get to the venue around 8:30. So this is going to take into account things like traffic, any unexpected delays, and you want to reduce all of that unnecessary stress on the day. Now for the really important stuff, some of the two brings of the test day. So you're going to get a copy of the test admission ticket. This should come out on the same day, I think, when you receive information about which day you're actually doing the exam. Now this needs to be printed and brought with you on the day. Have it ready the night before, have it in the bag, take with you to the exam venue. For the rest, bring some 2B pencils, eraser, pencil sharpener, a clear bottle of water, and also wear your school uniform on the day. Make sure you pack some food since you'll be there for a while. There will be breaks in between the tests. But again, it's going to be a long day and you're going to be very tired, so make sure you have food with you. If you have any questions about what exactly to bring or not bring, there are details on the DET website, so take a look at those and just make sure you know all the details that's necessary leading up to the day. Okay, so this sort of summarizes all of the tips that we have for our students. Now, for parents, the final month is when we often see some of the biggest improvements in student performance and things sort of really start to click into place. This is why as we get closer to the exam, it's also a perfect time to revisit those school preferences we put down earlier. On the application, I think those will close on the 18th of May, so you have a little while after the test to finalize those decisions, but really start taking a look and figuring out what schools you want to solidify your choices for. If you're unsure about which schools to list or how competitive certain options might be based on your child's progress, we do have the OC and Selective School Calculator, like I mentioned before. So there's an image of that and the schools that it can display when you input your data. But pretty much it's a great tool that will show you the range of potential schools your child can make and also gives you a more informed choice rather than just comparing performance levels with um, other factors. So this can really kind of tell you pretty much a good range of what schools you can make into. But again, I do want to just specify that the calculator is modified or based off Alpha 1's level of difficulty. So with any external tests, it may be easier, maybe harder. So it's going to be a less accurate reflection of those schools. We'll have a full length video going through all the factors that you need to consider when choosing school preferences. So this video also goes into more depth about how to use our calculator. And if it's something you're interested in, I think there is a link which will include in the description. So you can always check that out. And it's pretty informative, give you some good insight on how you can put down school choices. So for Alpha 1 students, you'll notice that with your reports from those trial test courses you're doing with us, it has all of this data on it already. Please note that the data from your report is actually more accurate because it takes into account the difficulty, rankings, and other adjustments from the cohort that is doing the exam with you. So this is all done by our dedicated data team. And I'd say, stick with those reports and the data you're seeing there. It's going to be more accurate than putting marks into the calculator. So just to remind everyone again, it is a great time to do more exam practice, and there's a lot of other resources out there for selective and OC, especially now that we're a few years into those changes in subjects like GA becoming thinking skills and maths becoming mathematical reasoning. So there's a lot more stuff out there now to help this year's cohort succeed in their exams. I've listed some extra resources and just places where you can find a lot of helpful materials on the page there. First of all, I really encourage everyone, before they do the real test, to have a go at past selective papers. And these are available on the DET website. I believe there's around 3 papers available, and the questions itself are a very good indicator of the difficulty level and style that you'll be getting in the test. Other things like bookstores, so Five Senses, they carry a lot of New South Wales educational resources, and this means you get a lot of selective and OC related content as well. So they're a great one to check out along with Dymix. For Alpha 1, we do offer the April holiday program, which will run across the 2 weeks. Our OC enrollments actually close very soon. So for those parents who are still looking at getting a spot, please do that as soon as you can. We do have some online mock test packs for purchase as well as extra practice. And we do currently have a sale because it's so close to the exam. I believe it's around 30 papers, which are for sale at 120. So it's roughly a little more than $4 a test paper. Each of them will come with work solutions and just a good way to get your child practicing those computer-based exams. I'll just mention again, our writing feedback tool, very useful for those that may have missed it at the start. Any extra writing you do, if you do want selective and specific feedback for improving marks within the selective school marking criteria, that tool is going to give you the information that you need and the feedback that you need to work on those aspects. Our groups, so Facebook, WeChat, they share a lot of practice resources. And besides resources, they also do a lot of information as well for OC and Selective. So you're going to get a lot of posts, which is going to remind parents about specific cutoff dates and just other helpful information related to the exam. Okay, so in terms of, I think, just other practice in general, there's a lot of stuff out there. Easily, you can Google some stuff and find a lot of sites that provide just practice questions in general. So that's pretty much everything for A. And thanks so much for tuning in, first of all, and taking the time to listen. We do hope that this session has given you a clear understanding of how the new weighting works, how to support your child, and in the lead up to the test, how you can approach that final month with a bit more confidence and a bit more strategy. So wishing everyone good luck in the upcoming OC and selective tests. And we know that everyone's been working really hard. We're hoping that all of your efforts will pay off, and we know that you'll see the results of that hard work. For any parents of our selective cohort who have concerns about the transition from primary school to high school, make sure you keep an eye out on our website, our socials, and also in your emails for further resources and events from us. The OC and Selective Test are only early first steps of your child's academic journey, and we are here to support you throughout the next steps as well. So it won't be the last time you hear from us. OC and Selective is very early stages. The kids are still young, and as they progress into high school and HSC, we offer a lot more information, resources, and just help to guide them along the way as well. So we'll start diving into our Q&A session. If you have any questions, you can start popping them in the chat. I think admin will be there to help out, answer some questions, but I'll also go through a lot just to explain them in a bit more depth. So it could be anything, whether it's about preparation, school preferences, maybe testing logistics. Literally anything. Pop them in the chat and I'd be happy to go through and answer. Give everyone a moment to throw their questions in. A lot of the stuff that I mentioned throughout the video will be linked in the description. So afterwards, if you take a look, you'll be able to access all of those sites, the test packs, calculator, writing tool. It will be included in our description as well. Okay, so I'll start off with the first question I can see here. Is there a difference between taking the test on an earlier day versus a later day? From what we know, there should not be a difference. So the tests between 3 days are going to be different to ensure fairness. If it's the same test, then of course it's going to be very unfair, and it will be different questions. So whether you're doing it earlier or later, there won't be that unfair advantage for anyone. Okay, when will I find out where and when my exam is? So I believe the test admission ticket, which will be sent out to individual parents, it's going to be released around 10 a.m. on the 17th of April. So you can keep an eye out on the website, in your inbox for that information. When is the last class of the semester, and is that the last class before the exam, or are we coming back? So I guess you're referring to Alpha 1 class dates. After we finish this term, we'll just have the holiday program, and unfortunately I won't see you guys again probably until either once year 4 WMT starts or once you guys are back for high school. But hopefully I do see a lot of faces and I get to hear about how you guys go during the exam. So yeah, holiday program will be the last one that we run leading up to both exams. Are we allowed to bring a ruler? I would advise no, nothing that is not listed on the website on what you should bring. So I think the only things were from the earlier pages that I had, and that should also be available. I'll just go back to this page. Yeah, so test admission ticket, pencil, eraser, sharpener, bottle of water, and uniform. I think those are the things that you really need. And bring some snacks as well. Try to avoid things like pens, rulers, notebook, smartwatch, phones, anything that can distract you or even cause some issues if you forget to remove it or take it off during the exam. Just bring the stuff that you need. Okay, interesting question. So do you think Borkham Hills is still a good option given that they are dropping a lot recently? Look, historically, Borkham Hills has been a very good school. A lot of the time, especially when I was in high school, they were ranked around the top 3, second, right after Ruth. So I still would say Borkham Hills is a very good school. I don't think occasional drop in rank or fluctuation is an indication of the overall quality of the school. Generally, it means that the school may be prioritizing other things. So for example, with James Roos, a big reason why they had a drop in ranking, besides North Sydney boys just doing really well overall, was that they did have a change in principal, and there was a bigger focus on things like mental health and things outside of just purely academics. They weren't pushing as hard, but at the same time, James Roos still does extremely well for the results. They're not far off North Sydney boys. So I think don't focus too much on these little fluctuations, and they shouldn't contribute too much to your decision making. As long as the school is something that you're keen to go to, it's easy to attend, and you have the marks for it. You're confident that you can make it in comfortably. I think that always makes it a good selection. Is the selective test in the morning or afternoon? So it's in the morning. You need to be at the test center by 9 a.m., but we probably recommend getting there earlier because it's going to be an unfamiliar location. Things like traffic, anything else that can occur on the day of, you want to take into account. So try to get there by 8:30. Usually admin will run for the first half an hour just to get everyone set up, and your test is going to start at around 9:30. How accurate is the calculator? So the calculator is to give you a rough idea based on your exam marks. And again, I'd say if you're doing papers that are more similar in level to the selective test or similar level to Alpha One's papers, then it's going to give you a good range. Try to use an average as well. I don't think one input of your marks is going to give you a very accurate kind of idea of which schools you can definitely get into or which schools you definitely can't make. Probably try to average it out, and across those averages, you'll get an idea of which schools are a good fit and good options to put down. The calculator is also sectioning schools into very difficult to make. You've got a decent chance and it'll be very easy to attend. So there's 3 different colors. But based off that, you can spread out your selections too. Is there a class next week? Yes, there is. Is it a good idea to send my daughter to North Sydney Girls? If you're happy to expand a bit more on that question, I can definitely go into it. If there's anything specific you were asking about North Sydney Girls, I can definitely answer that. So maybe add a little bit more to that question, and I'll try my best to answer. Okay, how are offers given based on school options? If we don't get the first option, would we be waitlisted for the second and third? Okay, this is a great question. I might go in depth with this one, and I'll try to explain the way that school allocation works to the best of my ability. So, in terms of the test, you're going to get a certain mark, and across everyone that does the test, you're going to be listed from the student who did the best all the way down to the student with the lowest mark. So think of it as a list of students from highest to lowest mark. Now, from this list, the first student on the list is going to be allocated to their first school preference. The next person on their list will probably also get their first preference. The third person gets their preference, fourth person gets theirs. So they continue down the list until a specific school, let's say James Roos, fills up. So there's no more spots available because all the spots at Roos are now taken as they go down the list. Let's say the next student had Roos preferenced as a first choice school, but because Roos is full, they're going to get their second preference offer, right? Same thing for the next student on the list. If their first preference is already full, they're going to get their next school. And as they continue down that list, that's how they're allocating kids to particular schools. And as the schools fill up, the preferences will also be affected. So I hope that made sense. And in terms of things like cutoff mark, I think there's a big misinterpretation where if you get a particular mark, you're going to get into that school. It's not really the way it works. Cutoff mark is defined by the last student that gets into the school. So you'll see in the past, cutoff marks come out after all of the results come out and school offers come out, because the last student that makes it into the school is technically the cutoff mark. Well, the mark that they got is the cutoff mark. If we don't get the first option, we'll be waitlisted for the second and third. Yeah, again, just referring back to that system I had just described, if you are Or if your second choice still has spots and you're the next person to be allocated school, then yes, you will. Um, it does depend though, there is the unfortunate chance that you may not get an offer at all, but waitlisting will happen if you can't make it into your first preference, but it is there and you are waiting on a spot. Should we study the night before the test? So I briefly went over this, and the answer is to a certain extent, no. I think it's good to revise. I think it's good to revisit some of your errors, some things that can help you try to avoid, those silly mistakes on the test day. But I don't think it's worthwhile trying to learn new content, trying to stay up all night, learning as much as you can right before the test and hoping that it pays off. I think it will do more harm than good, honestly, to try do that. So try to stay calm, do the prep beforehand. This is also why the study routine leading up to the exam is important. You're not cramming everything on the night before. Any guidance on how to take an estimated guess? So when we talk about an estimated guess, it's really just trying to make a guess with the highest chance of success, right? So if we're talking about an estimated guess, first of all, ruling out options that you think are definitely wrong. It also means if you're choosing between two options, trying to go with the one that you think might be more correct. Rather than just guessing a question straight up, you're spending a bit of time trying to solve it, giving it your best shot, but ultimately not completely solving it and going with an answer that you think is most likely going to be correct. Yeah, but you can refer to some of the points I mentioned earlier in the video as well about guessing. Mm. Any tips on how to choose schools in terms of transportation to school? Yeah, I think this is a pretty important question, and sometimes does get neglected. So transportation, if you think about it, it's going to be 6 years of your high school life. If you're spending an hour on transport back and forth, 2 hours a day, across Monday to Friday, these sort of transport times add up, and it's something that you do want to consider. So unless you do plan on moving houses or relocating to a school that you end up getting to, I would choose schools based off locality and how easy it is to actually get there. Yeah, and a lot of times things like travel is going to cut into extracurriculars. So you'll find that even with, after school sports, things like that, if you want to do those extracurriculars, it's very difficult to accommodate that when you have a really long travel time included into your day. So you're losing out on a lot of other aspects of life when you're doing a lot of traveling to and from school. I think a question from earlier, if we decline our first option, will we still receive an offer? Um, so you will only be offered one school. So you won't be able to kind of pick and choose, even if you do get, the marks for all of the schools. Or comparatively to other students, you scored better than them and technically can have entry to any of those schools. You'll get one offer, and if you do decide to decline that offer, unfortunately, you won't be able to choose between your second or your third choice. So the way that you would want to select schools is putting the one that you really want to go to first. And generally, you want to do it in an order of top performing to a low performing school, just because in terms of popularity and competitiveness, it's going to even out a little bit. But yeah, ultimately, first choice is school that you really do want to go to, rather than just, it's a high scoring school. I'm going to put it down, see how I go. Try to avoid that mindset. But yeah, really put down a school that you're actually keen on attending as your first option. Do you think your test papers are similar in difficulty to the actual selective school exam? So In terms of test papers, you're going to get fluctuations where sometimes the cohort finds that a paper is a little bit easier. Sometimes they find that it's a little bit harder. So in terms of the way we write our content, we definitely try to keep it as close to the real test as possible. We don't intentionally go too hard or too easy. It's as close as we can get. But in terms of how the cohort responds, sometimes they might find it a little bit easy, sometimes a little bit harder. Most of the time, I would say it's a pretty close range to the actual exam. Subject sequence, so writing, reading, maths, and thinking skills, same as what you've done across those past holiday programs. Yeah, across the full day, writing, reading, math, thinking skills. Will I need to bring my own computer? No. So that's another thing, right, with typing. You want to get good practice and you want to be familiar with doing things online. Just because you're going into this new environment, you're going to be using a device that you've never used before, most likely. So you won't be able to use your own computer that you're familiar with and good at typing on. So that's why you need to have a lot of practice and familiarity with those online formats. How do bands work? Mm, Is this for test results? So I'm assuming you're referring to the band that you get from your exam results. So the band sort of shows a percentile. So for example, the top 10 percentile is you're in the top 10% of students. Um, the way that they release that information, honestly, it's because they don't really want kids to have competition, like or feel the sense of competition between each other. Because in the past, when they did those pure marks, it's very competitive, right? And people are going to look at each other's marks. So now they do a percentile. It's a lot more subtle way of saying, this is how your child did. This is a range, and this is how they compare to the cohort. I'd say it's a bit more of a gentler way to tell you how you've done. How do reserves work? So the reserve list, usually you'll see things like A, B, C, D, E. Generally, I think there's some more information on the website, but it shows you the rough timeline of each reserve band. So if you're in A, I think it's like a month or around that time, you'll usually get an offer. If it's something like E, you're kind of unlikely to get an offer or you're waiting a much longer period of time to get an offer. That's not a promise though. It's kind of based on past records of how long it took for offers to go out for people in reserve bands. But reserve usually happens when people decline offers and a spot opens up for um, one which was originally taken by another student. Do we have any idea around the cutoffs? So if you're talking about cutoff mark, doesn't really exist anymore because kids don't get given a mark. But if you're talking about the kind of school rankings, that is definitely available. We have a lot of past records showing how schools perform. And a lot of it is based off HSC as well. But when it comes to putting your school choices down, it depends on kind of popularity and how every other parent chooses. So if a school's very popular, it's going to be more difficult to get into. Yes, but a really good rundown is looking at their HSC marks. That's a general reflection of competitiveness for the selective as well. When will you get your results? So you can expect them around the 31st of July. How are partial selectives different to normal selective schools? Okay, so with partials, generally you don't have a full school of selective students. It's two classes, right? So probably around 60 kids, which means that the spots are a bit more precious as well. But with partial selective schools, in junior years, you'll have those separate classes running for the selective students. Once you get to senior years, though, which is your HSC years, so 11 and 12, they don't really have the capacity to keep classes separate anymore. So you get a merge of the full school and full cohort. So when you're doing your HSC subjects, things like maths, maybe chemistry, English, they will merge everyone and you'll no longer be in a separate class with selective students alone. That's probably the main difference. What if I don't get any of my preferences? If you're asking in terms of, still really wanting to go to a particular school, but unfortunately not being able to make it, you still have a lot of opportunity down the line. What happens is you'll get a chance to do school transfers. So this happens across years 7 all the way up to 10, I believe. And schools will usually open up spots here and there, have spots become available where if you do want to do a transfer, you can use your report and an interview or an exam that they hold to try and apply and transfer into a selective school. Do the fully selective schools only focus on academics, or do they also focus on sports or other extracurriculars? So, with fully selective schools, yes, they definitely do a lot of extracurriculars. Um, I'd say the impression that you have where academics is a very strong player, everyone's very good at academics and invests a lot of extra time into studying, I'd say is always part of a school, but not everything that they have to offer. Even with, let's take Sydney Boys, for example, they perform really well academically, but they're also known for their sports. Schools like Fort Street, they focus a lot on music programs. So when I attended Fort Street, they had a really good orchestra program going. There were multiple bands, and yeah, it's a really great time. I didn't actually really want to join at the start, but friends around me, a lot of the cohort was participating and it got me into the music program and I really enjoyed it after that. So they offer a lot. A lot of it is also part of the kind of curriculum that the government has to do. So things like music, arts, your other subjects, history, geography, engineering, all these things kind of are available across a lot of the top performing selective schools. Okay, so is there a word limit with the writing one? I'm assuming for selective. Not that I'm aware of, but I do want to emphasize if you're really focusing on word limit, maybe think about the quality of your writing rather than how much you can get down on the page. I don't think there is a word limit, and I don't think you'll get to a point where you're gonna struggle with trying to fit all of the words on the page or on your screen. So it shouldn't really be an issue, but try not to think too much about getting a lot of words down. Think about more the quality side and how well you're writing. Okay, so if I get an offer plus a reserve, will I get to choose between the two if my reserve turns into an offer? So usually what they'll do, because reserve gets dragged out for a while, all you can do is you can always accept your the offer that you made it into and stay on the reserve list. I believe there's a choice. You're allowed to make a choice whether you want to stay on the reserve or you want to drop your reserve, in which case people down the line will see their reserve kind of progress into A, B, C zones. So yes, you do have a choice. And if you choose to stay on the reserve, if by a deadline you do get that spot, then you will be able to gain entry into that school. But yes, you won't really be stuck in a situation where you very quickly have to make a decision between accepting the offer that you got and or sticking with a reserve that you're on. Okay, you guys are asking very interesting questions. um, So I think this question asking about the first choice is Bulko, second is NSG, and then the reserve situation. I think that's pretty relevant to the question I was answering before. So you will be able to maybe accept an offer first, stay on that reserve list, and then there'll be deadlines basically. So you'll have time, but it is a limited amount of time to make a choice. Um, and you just need to really make a decision by a certain time. But you can accept an offer first and then stay on a reserve list. Hopefully, you do get a spot, but by the time deadline hits and you aren't able to, then yeah, you will need to make a decision. My son's always crying because he's worried for selective. Should I be concerned? How do I stop it? Oh, really sad to hear that. But I think if he is getting so upset to the extent that he's crying about it or getting a lot of anxiety and being very nervous over that, I think maybe try to redirect his attention to something else. I think it might just be consuming a bit too much of his life. Something like selective, it is a major thing for kids in year six, and it could be a big milestone, but I don't think it should start to impact happiness, their mental health, their life balance. Um, so I'd probably say redirect a lot of his attention elsewhere, just for the overall his overall health. I'd say maybe something like sports, going out, doing something different and not just focusing too much on selective, trying to minimize that in terms of how much it takes up in his life and also just in his brain, right? Because it seems to be really getting to him that this is a big thing and he really needs to do well. I would say, try and minimize the impact of the exam and how he sees that as how it will impact his future. I think another point actually with kids that are really stressed about the exam is I feel like a lot of times for these younger kids, they see it as, if they don't make it in, it's the end of the world. They don't really know that there's a lot of other options out there, even with, a local school. It's going to be a very enjoyable high school experience either way. Selective is just something for kids that are up for it. If they're very gifted academically and they want that extra kind of challenge, those schools are there for them. Doesn't mean that a local school is going to be a horrible experience. So letting kids know that it's just one of the many options that they have out there is really going to help with those kind of thoughts where they're getting very upset if they don't get into a school. And yeah, I think just having more perspective is going to help them. Pressure on students. Will there be a lot of pressure on students in full selective compared to partial? Pressure? I would say there's always pressure in any school. If you're going to do HSC, if you're going to go to university, it's always going to be pressure. In terms of full selective, I would say it kind of evens out because everyone there is focused on this one goal, right? Everyone there is good enough to make it into the school, academically gifted. They probably have family that are very supportive, want them to do well academically, and that amongst these kids, it starts to feel normal. Studying a lot, doing your homework, it's going to start feeling like a normal thing. So I wouldn't say that it becomes like an overwhelming amount of pressure to really do well. I think instead it becomes more of a natural, like we all want to perform well, we want to make the school proud, we want to do well as a cohort. That kind of mentality starts to form. And yeah, I think for partially selective schools, even then, once you hit those HSC years, kids are a lot more focused on that goal. And your HSC marks are influenced by how your cohort performs as well. So a lot of kids will care about that. They want to do well. And I don't think the pressure side of things is ever really overwhelming unless they're kind of doing it wrong. Yeah. Um, Okay, I'm just having a look through the next few questions coming through. Okay, this is an interesting one. So, my child goes to many tutoring centers but is not improving. Mm, okay, I'll talk a little bit about this one. So I think, first of all, kind of what sort of results are you looking for? Is it more like you want to see better grades when it comes to school reports? You want to see them performing well against the tutoring cohort, which is a much tougher crowd, or you want them to be more confident when it comes to just work in general, right? So if he's going to a lot of tutoring places, but you're not really seeing improvement where you want to see it, it could come down to a couple of things. So could be that, first of all, if your foundation is not there, that's very important. You can't really build on top of knowledge if they aren't able to do like really basic questions. So if they can't do addition, long division, multiplication, and again, I'm just speaking generally, but if they're lacking in those skills, then any sort of more complex multi-step problem solving question is going to become very difficult for them. So I'd say try to figure out exactly where they're not able to improve, what exactly is causing it. Again, identifying those areas for test taking skills, identifying exactly where they're weaker and need to work on those areas, and then going from there. Yeah, I wouldn't say that, necessarily going to a lot of tutoring places is going to really push your child's mark up. It does come down to being smart about studying rather than just, grinding it and studying hard. So someone else followed up with saying, my child is very weak at maths. How can he fix? Weak at maths. If again, I'm assuming this is sort of the year 4 to 6 range. I'd always say go back to basics, foundations. So things like, can they do multiplication in their head from your 1s to 12s? Are they able to really quickly write out any long division, long multiplication? All those basics are going to contribute to a more difficult question. And then knowing, topics. I know a lot of schools now, and we hear a lot of parents complain about this, unfortunately, but a lot of schools aren't really that strict on things like homework, getting the kids to stay on top of their learning. So I think it's something that parents do need to put in that extra effort into identify. If your kid is lacking in a certain area, it could just be they never learnt things like fractions well, right? They never really covered that topic properly. Anytime they come across more difficult questions that involve a bit of fractions, ratios, they're going to struggle a lot. And these are more major topics as well. So figure out where exactly they're struggling with and then going from there. But yeah, starting small, starting on the foundation is always a good way to begin. Okay, so I'll probably start wrapping things up in 10-15 minutes. So if anyone has any more questions, try to throw them all out now. I'll get through a few more. Again, it is all recorded, so you can always revisit if you're worried about missing out on anything. So yeah, everyone quickly put your questions in the chat and I'll get around to as many as I can. And we'll try to wrap it up around 8:30. Any breaks between each test on the day? Yeah, there will be breaks. So I think the sample schedule we had was for OC, but OC has around like 10-15 minute breaks between the 3 tests. For selective, you'll have a slightly longer break. This is from past information, by the way, because the government actually has not released that much for this year's structure and the details around these tests. Because like I said early on, they've made just so many changes for this year's cohort. But we don't have a lot of information. There will definitely be breaks though. I'd say probably a short break between your writing and reading section, and then slightly longer, maybe lunch or recess break between reading then maths, plus a small break between maths and thinking skills. The order of the tests, yep, so writing, reading, maths, and thinking skills. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of comments about things like stress and whether, um, what's like sort of too much tutoring. And I'll try and read through all of these so I can give like a summarized answer for everyone. Okay, so I can see one which is talking about doing a lot of tutoring. So I'll quickly summarize. I think going extreme to the extreme one way or another is never really the sort of healthy answer. So if you're doing a lot of tutoring, like filling up the whole week with just tutoring, even though you might see some improvement, I don't think that's probably the best way to approach it. And honestly, each kid is cut out different, right? For myself, I think when I was doing OC and selective, I definitely did a lot of tutoring and it died down after I finished selective and was in junior high. But during that time leading up to selective, it did get to a point where I was just saying, Mum, this is too much tutoring. Like, I don't really want to handle it. I can't deal with all of the homework and things like strict teachers as well, where they put a lot of extra pressure, unnecessary pressure. If you don't complete the homework, there are consequences. So I think all of that starts to add up, and you don't really see the kids' side of their perspective when it comes to tutoring centers. So I'd say stick to the amount that you need. Try to find a good course or something that is going to cater exactly to what your child needs, and then focus in more on that. I wouldn't say quantity is necessarily going to equate to better outcomes. You want to really try focus on finding the right course for your child. So if they're weaker in something like English, you're probably looking at doing something more English and writing specific rather than focusing on a WMT course that covers everything. If they're weaker in maths, a math specific course, but that also means putting in a little bit of time on the side at home, getting them to do practice, even little drills at home. You can print off worksheets that do easy things like multiplication, addition, really easy drills, right? And they can just sit down, spend 15 minutes going through multiple questions. It's going to improve their speed, accuracy. So it is a hard question to answer, how much tutoring is too much. I think it's different for every kid, but if you do recognize that your child is starting to become really stressed, become really different to how they usually are, I think that's probably a time to assess whether, they're healthy choices. Okay. In the actual selective test, do children get Windows or Mac laptops slash a PC? Okay. I'm pretty sure they're all going to be laptops because there's no way they can set up PCs for all of you guys. From what I've heard, they're most likely going to be Acer laptops. That's going to be a part of the entire range of laptops that they used. So I think logistically, if you think about it, the government is getting a third party to source all of this, and it may not necessarily be a standard device. So you'll get a range of different laptop models, and across there you'll have a lot of different device types. But what I would say is you're looking at a full-sized keyboard, a big laptop with a big screen that kids can very easily look off. And yeah, that's pretty much how they'll be doing the test on the day. And I would say Windows out of standardization. I believe most of them would be Windows. Why have OC options gone from 2 to 4, but selective is still at 3? So OC, they did introduce some new schools. So I don't remember the exact year, but they introduced a few new schools, quite a few new schools actually, with ranging from 15 to I think 2 classes worth of spots. So I think that increase in the number of OC schools available has also affected the amount of options and flexibility that parents have in terms of choosing schools. Selective, there hasn't been that much change in terms of the schools themselves. You still have the same old, selective schools. Therefore, I don't think they've decided to change much in terms of the options that you have with selecting preferences. Does schoolwork have any weighting on secondary school application? If you're talking about selective, no, it does not. Selective or OC, nothing is considered besides the actual mark you get in the exam. Yeah, in the past they did. In the past it was half school mark and half test mark. It was really unfair, but they've changed that now. It's just all test mark. But it also means you only have one shot at the exam. If a what is a support unit? I think you're referring to for high school support unit. I think that's just kind of like an extra program some schools run to support students. I don't believe it's that relevant for selective, but sometimes they'll have like school support officers come in, and it's just to help students that need a bit of extra assistance. It doesn't always have to be academics, could be things like behavior, but yeah, it is kind of extra support that the government has running. I don't think it's too relevant to selective though. So if I did mention it earlier on, I think it might have been something else that I was talking about. Okay, so I think quite a few questions talking about if a school accepts 120 students and 100 students get in, but then the last 50 people have the exact same mark, how will they pick the last 20? Okay, so first of all, that sort of a scenario isn't too likely where you end up with like a really big number of people that have the exact same mark and you end up with schools catering to a much bigger cohort. But in terms of class sizes, they do generally range a little bit. So I think it should be on the DET website, but there's a range for the number of students to teachers. I think this gets taken into account for selective, but otherwise, if you do get a few students within the same range, I think they'll somehow make accommodations for those. With the new changes happening, I'm not certain how they might approach that, but we'll have to see after this year. How can I motivate my child to learn how to encourage children's self-motivation? Yeah, I think it is quite difficult, especially in this day and age. We get a lot of kids that are just chronically addicted to their screen. So it does make it a lot more difficult to try and get them to focus, especially with short attention spans. I think building healthy habits, from very young age. So super important for those kids that are doing year 4 at the moment. Having those good habits where there's a time for study, there's a time for play, and being able to take that into their senior high school years as well, leading up to HSC, something that's very helpful. And it doesn't become such a big contrast between, being too relaxed versus having to study a lot leading up to the selective test. So I think it may be one of those factors where if they're not really motivated to study, it's because they're already used to this environment where they don't have to have a set routine when it comes to studying, or they find that it's very difficult to switch, on and off between those two modes. So I think those sort of factors to look into, and just start small, trying to get him to, or her, trying to get them to work up towards, being able to put aside time and focus and study. But it is very normal at the same time. Like, not all kids are going to be able to sit down, independently work, especially in primary school. Not a lot of independent workers. Parents have to sit down with them, do the homework with them. Yeah, that is unfortunately just how it is. And it was like that for me as well. So did the government clarify how they would handle the day if the laptop students are using is not working as expected. If the laptop affects a few students, this will be unfair to those affected. Yes, I believe they will have some backup devices. It's not going to be like if your device stops working, that's it. You can't do the exam at all that day. I'm sure they'll have accommodations. I would say that just logistically, if there is something and it causes a student to not be able to do the exam on a day, perhaps they will schedule one of the other days for the kid to come in and do the test. But yes, it would cause a bit of unnecessary stress. And I'm sure they test all of the laptops beforehand. So they try their best to make everything run smoothly because they want to avoid a situation where issues are occurring left and right for such a big cohort doing their tests on devices. Okay, so we'll wrap up soon. Any final few questions? I'll try to pick out some more like relevant ones for everybody, but if you have anything you'd like to ask, just throw it in the chat. Oh, okay, interesting question. So there's one about, does the selective test mirror UCAT? So UCAT is something that's very different. That is for, I believe, undergrad med entry. So you have that and GAMSAT, which is for postgrad med entry. I'm not sure if this is a student asking or maybe a high school student who's interested in this, but no, very different. I would say the skills they kind of test, maybe there's a little bit of overlap. So things like general ability does come up in, or similar to general ability does come up in your GAMSAT exam, but otherwise, no, very different levels of question difficulty as well. Okay, and maybe we'll just do one more question. I'll see if Right. So last question I'll go through for today. Why did they remove the mark and only give percentile? So I think I actually did talk about this one earlier, but previously kids were getting the marks. So early on it was out of 300, and then they changed it to out of 120, and now they only provide a percentile. And I think the government is really just trying to foster a more healthy attitude and perspective of the selective exam, because I'm sure they're aware as well how competitive it is and how many parents are really pushing their kids to try and get a spot in a selective school. So by removing that mark, there's a lot less sort of competition when it comes to, not really competition, but a lot less comparison when it comes to what mark did my child get, what mark did your child get. And from that, they're trying to reduce, stress, anxiety, this sort of unhealthy environment that having a set mark can create. So instead, you just get a percentile, which is a much bigger range and a very vague indication of how you performed. Okay, cool. Sorry, one more. Are the questions each stay the same? No, they won't be the same. Otherwise, it would be very unfair for those that do it on the first day. So I'll wrap up now. So I hope all this was helpful and answered most people's questions. So with Alpha One, for those students or parents who are still looking to do last minute preparation for the exam, we do have our online test packs that are available now, and they are time tests as well that will automatically mark your answers. So if you're looking, to improve within this 1 month, get a bit of extra practice, you'll be able to use that one. I think it's on our website, and we'll include the link in the description as well. I know a lot of people were asking earlier about where they can access those test papers. So yeah, check those out along with our pages, which provide a lot of free resources and questions as well. Okay, so I'll end it here. Thank you again, guys, for joining, and I'm always happy to host these live sessions and interact with everyone that either comes after comes to Alpha One or has heard of Alpha One from elsewhere, just kind of see what everyone's impression is of these selective and OC tests. So hopefully I'll see you guys in another session sometime in the near future. And yeah, it's getting late, so have a good night, everyone. See you guys.